95% of this is lifestyle, right? Eating the way you evolved to eat, sleeping the way you evolved to sleep, and moving and, having activity levels, on par with kind of how you evolved and how you're designed, and controlling your stress. And really, until you get that locked in, all of that other stuff, that's just polishing the brass on the Titanic.
Welcome to Resilience Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Ostrolenk. This show is about building better humans, institutions, and systems. On the show, I'll be interviewing many different experts from across many different fields, including human optimization, health and fitness, team building, mind-body medicine. In the institutional space, we're looking at different institutions and how we can create new ones, new models and maps, including in medicine, in education, in intelligence community, in law enforcement, in the military, especially in the special operations community. Thanks for being here and enjoy the show. I'd like to introduce Dr. Kirk Parsley. He is a former SEAL and physician, widely regarded as one of the leading experts on sleep, health, and human performance. After serving as a SEAL, he went on to become a physician for the West Coast SEAL teams, where he pioneered strategies to optimize sleep and recovery for some of the world's most elite operators. His groundbreaking work revealed how poor sleep undermines resilience, performance, and long-term health. Insights that have since influenced athletes, executives, and military professionals worldwide. Dr. Parsley is the creator of the popular sleep remedy supplement, developed originally for the SEALs struggling with sleep issues. He frequently lectures internationally on topics ranging from sleep science and hormone optimization to stress resilience and peak performance. He has worked with high-level organizations, professional sports teams, and Fortune 500 companies to help leaders harness the foundation role of sleep in achieving sustainable excellence. Good to see you again, Kirk. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while. Good to see you, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. And, I think I've acknowledged you in the past, but I want to do a shout out. I don't know if you remember this, but because of your kind words about me to Micro, Dr. Stickler and Micro Hamilton, they brought me on to Apparel on Zoe. And I had 4 great years with them, doing all kinds of stuff in their medical center and stuff like that. And as a result of you. So thank you for
No,
that.
no, that was as a result of you. I just happened to be the guy who knew. Your skill that got you there, man.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to jump into sleep optimization. But before we even kind of get into that and peak performance, walk us through, Dr. Kirk Parsley, how your time in the SEAL teams, your time becoming a physician, and then you're opening to the fact like, hey, our guys are sleep is shit, and it's dropping their, obviously dropping their hormones, and then performance, and et cetera, et cetera. And then your work after leaving the teams and more broad audience. So a
Yeah,
little bit
sure.
of the history of Kirk.
Yeah. Well, let's see, back in 1970. Yeah, so I was actually a pretty decent athlete growing up. I was a terrible student. Hated school. I definitely would have been diagnosed with ADHD nowadays. But I was just diagnosed as a bad kid, back in those days. I ultimately ended up dropping out of high school to join the military. Heard about this training that was, supposedly the toughest training in the world, and I fancied myself a tough young man, and so I wanted to go do it. Didn't actually know what a SEAL was. I just, heard about this training that they do, and I was going to go do that.
What
Uh,
year was that, Kirk?
that was
What year?
1980. It was December of 87 that I joined. And then I left in the summer, that
Uh,
summer.
that was way before all the movies and the TV
Yeah,
shows
yeah,
and
before it was
the
cool, man.
book. Yeah,
Nobody
yeah,
knew
yeah,
what a
yeah.
SEAL was. Nobody knew. Yeah, when I came home for Christmas break and stuff, like, I'd tell my friends I was a SEAL, and they had no idea what that meant. They asked me if that meant I worked at SeaWorld or something. And,
Funny.
yes. So I went through SEAL training, um, you know, I'm humble enough to say that there's a lot of luck and fate that goes into that, and I was truly fortunate enough to make it through. Lots of really good dudes don't make it through. Um, and I was fortunate enough to make it through training. Did 6 years, towards I guess my first platoon. We had that first Gulf War where basically it was like a 1 year bombing campaign, and then we ran around and collected the surrender flags. And it was pretty much looking like America was never going to go into combat again. We were just like two too advanced, and like it wasn't even an issue. So I said, well, let me see what else I can do. Um, and I was dating a girl who was in grad school for physical therapy. I thought maybe I'd do that. And so I just kind of started looking in that world and ultimately ended up applying to medical school. I was already, that's a big transition, obviously, from a guy who didn't graduate high school. So there's
Yeah.
there's a lot of funny stories in there. But to keep things briefer, you know, I I I I kind of got shamed into applying for medical school by the doctors that I worked with in San Diego Sports Medicine Center, and basically their point was, hey, if you would want to go, then you should try, right? They're like, if you could get in, would you want to go? I said, yeah, and they're like, well, then why wouldn't you try? So I was like, okay, well, I guess that's a good point, but I didn't think I could get in, so. Actually did pretty well in undergrad, did pretty well in the MCAT, and when it came time to apply for medical school back in these days, you had to go to the bookstore and you get out your Kaplan review book and figure out what schools you were competitive for, given your GPA and your MCAT score and all that. And I think they recommended you apply for 20 schools or something. So, you're in there
Okay.
just looking for all the schools you're competitive for. And I found out the military had its own medical school. And at that moment, it was like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. And I was already married. I already had a kid, I had another kid on the way. And I looked into it. My time in service counted towards my pay. And I was like, you the military is going to pay me to go to medical school. I can support my family. My wife doesn't have to work. Or, right. And I was, okay, that's a no brainer. And I figured I'd be able to get back to the SEAL teams, or at least I hoped. I didn't know how it worked. I didn't know how the arrangements were for jobs and so forth. But I hoped that, maybe be able to go back to the SEAL teams and give back to that community, which, definitely shaped me as a man. And, and I did. The way the military works is, in the Navy specifically, is they let you do your first year of residency, and then you have to go out and be a general practitioner for a couple of years because they know you're going to stick around to come back and do your residence, finish your residency that you started. But they couldn't get anybody to volunteer out of medical school, right? Or right, so they're like, okay, you do 1 year, you go out, and then you can come back and do your residency. And so when I did that, I went back to the SEAL teams, and all of my educational process, my only exposure to medicine was as an athlete, right? So I knew I'd been to see a doctor for orthopedic injuries, essentially, right? Sports medicine and ortho is all I knew. That was all I was interested in. That's all I really paid attention to in medical school, right? That was where I was going. Um, and now when I went to the SEAL teams, they had just received funding to build their very first sports medicine facility, which I'd spent all of college, 6 years of college, since I was a high school dropout. So college was a 6-year experience for me. 'Cause I had to go to junior college for 2 years to qualify for college. And then, you know, I got there right when they were funding this, and they put me in charge of building the very first sports medicine facility the West Coast SEAL teams had ever had. And it was great. I got, and I mean, I don't want to say like I led the whole thing, but I was in charge of like that clinical division of it, and hiring our first physical therapist and athletic trainer. I was involved in hiring our strength and conditioning coaches and exercise physiologists and nutritionists and all that stuff. And we got amazing people from all over the world, uh, from all over the country. We got people from professional teams. We got people from the Olympic Training Center, which was nearby. We had people from Division I schools, just sort of the creme de la creme. Um, People who are just really motivated to serve in those days. Is 2009. There's a kind of a who American spirit, patriotism going, and people are like, yeah, I'd love to go work with these SEALs that already kind of developed their little celebrity status at that point. And then I was the dumbest guy around, right? Because we got all these people who had 15, 20 years of experience and were the best at what they
Mhm.
do. And I'm just like this guy waiting to do residency. And so when you're the dumbest guy around the military, they put you in charge, right? And they say, well, now you're going to supervise everybody. So they put me in the supervisory role of this facility, where everybody there knew their job orders of magnitude better than I did. So I was like, okay, I'll do whatever that means. The SEALs are a lot like professional athletes in that the worst possible fate they can imagine is being put on the bench, right? Being taken out of their platoon and set to the side for any reason whatsoever is the worst thing that can happen to them, because it's obviously it's a very difficult profession to get into. It's a very competitive profession once you're in it, but it's your culture. I mean, it's its own culture, and it becomes your family. Like when you're a SEAL, like everybody you know is a SEAL, right? And everybody you hang out with is a SEAL, and everything you do is focused around those guys. And the most likely person to put them on the bench is the doctor, right, or any healthcare provider. So
Yeah.
they, they usually will not tell their doctor anything. They'll tell their doctor everything's just fine. They'll go out into town and find a doctor to help them get whatever needs to be done and pay cash out of their own pocket to keep it out of their medical record. Um, but because I'd been a SEAL recently enough to where there are, a lot of guys around that I'd trained and deployed with and who trusted me, guys started coming in my office sort of one by one, closing the door behind them and said, "Hey man, just between you and me,
Mhm.
let me tell you what's going on." And went on to really complain of something that sounded a lot like metabolic syndrome, right? So, they came in and said, my mood's bad. I had a crappy mood. I'm snappy at home. I'm snappy at work. I'm snappy with my children. I'm snappy with my wife. I have, a lot of emotionality, uh, problems concentrating, problems with memory, short-term memory, working memory. I walk in a room, I can't remember while I'm in there. It take me 4 or 5 times to figure out, going in and out of that room before I remember why I'm in there. I feel tired all the time. I ache everywhere. I feel like I'm getting fatter. I'm getting weaker. I'm getting slower. I'm getting dumber. And I'm doing everything that the strength coach is telling me to do, and everything the nutritionist is telling me to do, and everything the trainer's telling me to do. And I'm following this, script, and I'm just getting worse. And now, interesting, for those who don't know, during SEAL training, we go a whole week without sleep, right? So, not a single guy complained about sleep problems in my office,
Mhm.
because in our culture, that's not something you actually need. That's a luxury that you get when you get when it's there. When the opportunity is there, you take it. And I'm ashamed to say how many guys came in my office. I don't remember exactly, but it was a lot of guys had been in my office before a kind of a light bulb went off in my head when this guy said he took Ambien. And interestingly enough, I didn't even ask him why he took Ambien. He was just listing his meds. I was like, okay, and I just wrote down his meds, and then I started asking him this, and they all told me the same story. I mean, it sounded like they'd scripted each other, right? And they probably did, but it was still true. They were all experiencing the same things, and I had told them I was honest from the get go. I was like, hey, I'm a Western trained physician. I've been trained how to recognize and treat diseases, and I can tell you confidently you don't have any diseases. However, I'll help you figure this out. I have no idea what we're going to do, but I'll help you figure it out. And that was enough. And so, they kept coming to me to give me their story. And, my first thought was, well, maybe it's this combat fatigue or shell shock or things I've heard about in other wars, right? Because we're 8 years into combat now. Very disappointingly, when you read that literature, though, they never figured out what any of that was.
Mhm.
It was just uh, a combination of symptoms that they called that syndrome, right? And so I said, well, that wasn't super helpful. Um, I'd started reading. I knew I was going to need to go outside of traditional medicine. So I'd started reading and studying in sort of alternative spaces and integrative medicine and alternative medicine, Eastern medicine. And there's this big buzz about something called adrenal fatigue. And well, that would make sense given our guys, what they've been going through. And so I said, well, let me just test what I can. And so my first step was, the traditional Western doctor. I'm like, well, let's get some labs. And my decision making matrix for the labs was, if I knew how to interpret the test, I included it. Right. That's essentially it. Right. So I was like, okay, let's send you over there. It turns out I knew how to interpret about 98 lab markers, and I sent them over to get these lab markers, and got in some trouble for that later, because it turned out that was about $3,000 per guy, and I probably sent 300 or 400 guys over to do that. Um, but I noticed really low anabolic markers, right? Testosterone, DHT, IGF-1, DHEA, pregnenolone, everything anabolic was low, catabolic hormones high, stress indices high, insulin sensitivity low. I mean,
Mm.
surprisingly low.
Mm.
Um, and so the funny thing was that what I said it sounded like at the beginning was metabolic syndrome. Well, the labs looked just like metabolic syndrome too. The only difference was it wasn't a 50-year-old man who was 40 pounds overweight. It was a 28-year-old dude with six pack abs. And I was like, okay, I don't really know. Right. But there's some findings, right? So there's some objective markers that, things aren't right. Of course, a guy can have, with the normal, the reference interval of testosterone being 250 to 1100 nanograms per deciliter. If he was 256, and he was 28 years old, I could send him to endocrinology and then be like, what are you talking about? He's normal, right? They're a disease-based model. And I'd be like, no, come on, man. You know who should be 1100 and who should be 250, right? But that was the buy-in I had. And um, so like I said, I knew these troubles were there. In fairness to the SEAL teams, they actually already knew that there was a deficiency, that SEALs were demonstrating a deficiency in testosterone within the normal range. There were guys falling off into the disease-based model below 250, but there were a lot of guys in 250, 300 that didn't make sense, and nobody knew why. And they'd been trying to figure it out for a couple of years. I think 5 or 10 years probably. And so I I got these. I had these labs on the guys. I was looking into things. The adrenal fatigue made a little bit of sense, but not a huge amount of sense. And then when that guy said something about taking Ambien, and it's kind of this light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, wait, seems like a lot of guys who come in here are taking Ambien. And then when he left, I went back through the files in my office, and every single guy who had been in my office was taking Ambien. And I thought, huh, wow, I wonder what Ambien does, right? Because, you know, because I went to a Western trained medical school. So a Western medical school, I didn't have a single class on sleep. I didn't know anything about sleep that, you know, the gardener and the SEALs didn't know. Like I didn't have any expertise on it. So I started studying that. I remember from pharmacology that, Z drugs were um, were the predecessor, or were the what not predecessor, the progressor, I don't know, whatever that word is, that they came after the benzodiazepines,
Yeah.
which were all GABA analogs. And so I was like, oh, I know it's a GABA analog. Now what GABA had to do with sleep, I had no idea. But okay, let me start there. So I started learning a lot, and what I did have going for me, was that the SEALs, like I said, already had their celebrity status, and so I'd watch somebody's TED talk or hear somebody lecture or read somebody's book, and I'd just call them on the phone, man. I'd be, hey, my
Nice,
name's Kirk
nice.
Parsley. I'm the doctor for the West Coast SEAL teams. I've read your book and whatever, and I'd really like to, come train with you or ask you some questions, maybe consult on some clients and all this.
Is
I
that
got
how, let me ask, is this how you and Rob became friendly?
well. I'll get to that in a second.
Sure.
But yeah, it's related. So yeah, so I learned a lot about sleep, and I learned that, lo and behold, all of your hormones are regulated while you're asleep. And I thought, huh, well, that's very interesting.
Mm.
And then I also learned that when you don't get enough sleep, your stress hormones go up. And I was like, oh, well, isn't that interesting, right? And so I thought, well, I wonder if Ambien is, interfering with their quality of sleep. And so I started researching some of that. And then it turns out that Ambien distorts REM sleep by about 80%, and deep sleep by about 20%. And alcohol does the exact opposite.
Interesting. Okay.
They were SEALs, and so they were coming home from work and having a couple of beers or a couple of cocktails and taking their Ambien, and, because they're SEALs, they need more Ambien than everybody else. Normal people need one, they need at least two, maybe three. And they would take their Ambien, use their alcoholic drinks, and they'd fall asleep for 4 hours or 5 hours, whatever, and they'd get up and they'd come to work the next day and grind through another day. Um, and I so once I learned that, I said, "Well, man, I wonder what would happen if we got rid of the alcohol and the Ambien." And of course, they were taking Ambien because they couldn't sleep, so I couldn't very well just say, "Well, suck it up, buttercup, just don't take anything." So again, I'm a Western trained doctor, man, so I went to very traditional PubMed, Cochrane database kind of, sites, and I said, "What supplements help with sleep and why?" And I started looking for, nutritional supplements to help with sleep. And I came up with a combination of about 6 different supplements, and I had no idea how much to give of each one, but with the help of the SEALs who were fastidious patients, they're super motivated to get better. I'd be like, "Okay, try this, try these," and we just progressively added them. We started with vitamin D3 and, vitamin D3 needs magnesium, so we added that, and then we knew we needed some melatonin to initiate and all this, and we just kept adding things, and we came up with this combination. It probably took a few months to kind of dial in to where it was working really well for most people, and then I just converted it to a handout. I started giving it to all the guys who'd been in my office and said, quit drinking, or you minimize your drinking at least. Do this every night. Coached them on sleep hygiene. Nobody was talking about any of this stuff in those days, right? Um, and literally, I was getting laughed out of the leadership's office telling them that I thought sleep was affecting their hormones. They were going, right, okay, that makes a lot of sense, doc. You need to go back to medical school. Literally, an officer literally told me that you need to go back to medical school. Um, and lo and behold, now everybody pretty much that you can go to you go to a mini mart down the street from your house, and 9 out of 10 people in there will tell you they understand that now. But nobody knew that in those days. And then I was giving him some just daytime support, like DHEA and pregnenolone and some zinc citrate. And lo and behold, guys' testosterone were triple, quadruple, free testosterone triple, IGF-1 was triple. Um, HSCRP would go from 5, 6, and 10, some crazy number like that, down to unmeasurable. Oxidation would go down. Uh, AM cortisol would normal out. Metabolites from epinephrine and norepinephrine were normaling out, and all. Lo and behold, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't the
Mhm.
100% solution, but it was probably 80% solution for 80% of the guys, right? Then, as you know, we had these pre and post retreat symposiums that we put on for the SEAL team. So before they would deploy and when they came back from deployment, we'd go out to a resort, we'd bring in some guest speakers, and we would talk to them about the trials and tribulations of about what they're about to go through, give their family support, mechanisms and all that, because it's rough both ways, right? It's rough when they're deploying, it's rough when they're reintegrating, and we would try to bring in people to speak that the audience was interested in. And, CrossFit and podcasts were kind of the big thing in those days.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And, Rob Wolf, one of those guys, and, Mark Sisson and John Wellborn and Chris
Mm.
Kresser and kind of all those guys, uh, Dominic D'Agostino, all
Yeah,
those,
yeah.
when they would come in and lecture. And I was the only guy talking about sleep, and they were all fascinated by that. And they were like, "Oh man, this seems like a missing piece that none of us have really thought about." And so, why don't you come on my podcast? And why don't you come? And so I did. And then I ended up being the sleep guy, right? And I was always interested in all of lifestyle. Like I was always coaching the guys on sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress mitigation. And then, of course, I do. Nowadays I do hormones and peptides and hyperbarics and psychedelics and you name it. Like if it works, I use it. But I've been labeled the sleep guy. That's what people hire me to do. And I travel around the world. I lecture on that. I do hundreds of podcasts on that. And then really at absolutely, because of the haranguing of the SEALs, that worksheet I converted to a product for them. And, Rob Wolf was one of, Rob Wolf and Peter Attia were both investors in that. And we were like, "Hey, let's put this together. We'll sell it to the SEALs. We'll make a little bit of money and go on about our business." And, that was 11 years ago, and that supplement company is still going strong, but, we
Nice.
Still don't
Nice.
have a contract with the SEALs or anybody else.
Oh, really?
Don't have any military contracts, but lots of team guides, lots of military people take it. We give a huge discount to people in the military and veterans and stuff like that. Yeah, and that's the Reader's Digest version. It still took 20 minutes.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I heard you name peptides, hyperbaric chambers, psychedelics, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously you're known as a sleep doc, but you're integrated or precision
Yeah.
based, like you bring in all these different tools. What's kind of exciting you these days in terms of tools that you're studying to utilize with your clients or your patients?
Man, I've got to say, we talked a little offline about my social media, and if
Yeah,
you pick up on the theme of my new social media, really, um, what's exciting me the most is simplifying everything, right? I
saw
just
that.
feel
Yes.
like everything has gotten so insanely complex and nuanced with all these individual influencers with their hero's journey and the biohackers and all this, and I'm not poo-pooing these guys' experience or what they have to teach, but that's a very nuanced, small thing, right? A red, a light bed, or even a hyperbarics. I'd say hyperbarics probably the most useful tool there out there as far as modalities, but all the different gadgets for measuring your heart rate variability and helping you learn how to meditate and
I got it all.
tracking all your stuff and
Yep.
all of that stuff. These very prescriptive workouts, very prescriptive morning routines. I'm just like, that's the 5% at best. It's probably more like the 2 or 3%. Like 95% of this is lifestyle. Eating the way you evolved to eat, sleeping the way you evolved to sleep, and moving and having activity levels on par with kind of how you evolved and how you're designed, and controlling your stress. And really, until you get that locked in, all of that other stuff, that's just polishing the brass on the Titanic, man. It's like
Right. Yeah, it's very true.
you have to be metabolically and physiologically healthy enough to benefit from something like a sauna or a cold plunge or a light bed or a PMF chair, something like that, right? Those are
Mhm.
recovery tools that are helping a little bit, but it's a small amount, and that small amount makes a big difference once you've kind of idealized everything. But it leads to this insane confusion in the general population,
Mhm.
when you start looking and it's like, well, you should eat a Mediterranean diet. No, you should eat a vegan diet. No, you should eat a carnivore diet. No, you should eat a keto diet. No, you should eat a paleo diet. And everybody's equally as convincing, right? And it's like, this is what's poisoning you. No, this is what's
Yeah,
poisoning you.
yeah.
And you know how to do it. You put butter in your coffee. No, you got to wear these glasses. No, you got to wear these glasses while putting butter in your coffee. No, you got to wear these glasses while putting butter in your coffee and sitting under this light and in the sauna, right? And people are just so overwhelmed. They're like, I have no idea what to do. And of course, they're not getting results out of that because there's no results to be had out of that. Again, that's the fine tuning.
Yeah, right, right.
Everybody, everybody is searching for, well, whether people are searching for it or it's just being sold. What's being sold is the end state solution, the mirrored results of the lifestyle, and not the lifestyle, right? The lifestyle is the important part.
Mm.
And so that's what I'm the most passionate about right now. It's kind of I want to turn that story around and be like, you know, your behavior is what matters the most. And your behavior is the hardest thing to change. And you can get poor sleep or inadequate sleep, um, exercise till you're passing out, eat the perfect diet, and you meditate all day, and you're still going to fall apart because you aren't sleeping well, right? But most people aren't even doing that. Most people are not getting good sleep. They're eating a mediocre diet. They're doing some mediocre workout because they don't really know what to do. They're following some influencer who looks great with their shirt off. And stress mitigation is not really a tool that they think is all that important to them. But they're doing their ice baths and they're doing their saunas, or they're doing their light panels, or they're doing all these little devices, and and all of that stuff's expensive. All of that's a huge investment, and it's a huge time investment. And I'm excited about just trying to change the conversation to like, hey, 95% of what you need is free. but it is, and it's very, very simple, but it is difficult. It is very difficult to change your behavior. You know that. I mean, you're in that world, and it's the hardest thing you can do is get people to change their behavior. And so that's what I spend my time doing professionally. Yeah, I prescribe hormones. Yeah, I prescribe peptides. Yes, I do. I'll give you supplements. I'll measure your blood work. We'll do all that. I'll get you in a hyperbaric chamber and all that stuff. But getting you to change your behavior, that's the tough thing, man. That's what people spend a year with me. I don't take on patients for a month or 2 or 3 or something. Like, it's an annual program
Okay.
because
Oh, actually,
it's
that's a
gonna
great
take a
segue.
year. It's
Yeah,
gonna take
yeah,
a
yeah,
year to
yeah.
change your behavior. You get
Because
everything, and
yeah. So
what I
yeah,
do
please.
what I do is drastically different, right? Based on how healthy you are or on how well your lifestyle's going, right? When we first start, I do more pharma and more hormones than I want to do because I'm trying to prop you up physiologically while we're getting your
Hmm.
lifestyle in order, and then we're going to taper off all of that, and we're going to keep you on the minimum that we need to have you on, and get the lifestyle to take over by the end. But as well as anybody, man, that takes every little step is weeks. It's weeks to change behaviors. Every little behavior is multiple weeks to change, and most people are coming into as my average client, is traded his health for wealth for 30 years or 40 years.
Right, right,
He's got $100 million now. He doesn't care about money. He wants to be a Division I athlete again, or at least look like one, right?
right.
Or, you know, yeah,
Yeah, I 100% agree with you on the behavior change, how difficult it is. And I also find too, and I'm curious on your take on this, it's important to get buy-in from your spouse
oh,
because that
absolutely,
could be either a detriment to your health and well-being or an addition to, and also your environment. And I'm
right,
curious, like, okay, how would you talk to a spouse in supporting your patient to sleep better, eat better, move better, all the kind of
yeah,
good stuff. And what are your thoughts on like environmental design in order to improve health outcomes?
yeah, yeah. So, I've been very fortunate in this world. It's the story I told you. I sort of I got to skip a lot of developmental step thing to have the brand recognition and awareness that I did early on in my career, because of all those podcasts and lectures I got in on super early. And so I've always been in a position to where I can spend enough time with my clients. That's the biggest hurdle right there, right? Because most physicians, I mean, they have 15 minutes if they're lucky to spend with their patients. I mean, I talk to some patients for 5 hours in a day if I need to, right? Like, as long as we need to talk about it, we talk about it. And so I keep that small, but I've been really lucky in that I'd say probably 80% or so of the married men that I treat, their wives will want treatment as well. And their
Okay,
wives
that's
will
fantastic. Okay, good.
they'll get a little bit of motivation from their husband. Their husband will start yapping his jaw about how great all this stuff is and how excited he is, and they'll want their wife on the call, and then she'll be interested. And my wife's a nurse practitioner who does exactly what
Yeah,
I do.
exactly. Yeah,
And so Brandy will take that over, and I take over the husband. Like, once we have the husband and wife team, it's a J curve from there, because now
right, right.
it is. I wouldn't say it's competition, but it's lifestyle mirroring, right? So
Hmm,
they're
hmm.
they're both going to be driving each other because they both know what they should be doing. And
Exactly.
then I'm fortunate enough to work with a lot of with several uh, nonprofits, veterans nonprofits that pay for me to treat SEALs. Now, I don't charge them
Nice.
for my time, but they have to pay for all the meds and supplements and hormones and hyperbarics and psychedelics, whatever we need to do. These organizations pay for it, and in the last couple of years they started paying for their wives as well. And so
That's
Brandy and
good.
I get to do
Okay,
that.
nice.
Now I will. I'm right there with you. I'll grant you, it is very, very difficult to get one partner to change, especially if they've been married for 20 years and one of them wants to have a couple of cocktails, a couple of glasses of wine every night, and the other one's trying to be good and get some stuff online. That's a very, very difficult sale. So the the environment that I work under, even if their wife doesn't want to get changed, or because I don't have the skill to deal with female hormones. It's too complex for me. I mean,
Mm.
they're a whole different machine. Um, I'll at least try to get their wives on the calls at the beginning and explain why I'm doing what I'm doing and why it's so important. And then I try to coach people on actually something I learned from Jordan Peterson. I try to coach people on how to schedule their day.
Nice. Yep.
And I said, uh, I was guilty of it. I've never been able to schedule my day before I learned this from him is, everybody uses their their schedule as a way to, browbeat and harangue themselves into doing stuff that they don't want to do. And then it doesn't work, right? Because because you don't want to do it. And like you don't want to you don't take that kind of crap from anybody else and you aren't going to take it from yourself either, right? And you're just like, I don't want to do that. I'll put that off later. So I say, what given everything that and everything that we know that's off on you now, because we've done labs, we've done a full assessment, and I set annual goals, and then we break those annual goals down into quarterly goals. And I say, given these quarterly goals, we're really striving towards this. If tomorrow could be a perfect day, what would that day look like, right? And you have to include the things that have to be done, right? You can't say every day that you wouldn't go to work. It's like, well, you have to go to
Yeah.
work. All right. So you have to do your work. So given that you have to do the work, what's the best thing that could happen at work? And then what's the best thing, just idealize for you,
Mm-mm-mm.
right?
Mhm.
Knowing what you know. And I never browbeat people and say, man, you aren't doing enough of this. You aren't doing enough of this. I say, here are your goals. We're striving towards this. How are we going to do that? How are you going to work towards that? And so we try to build that momentum every day to where they're feeling successful really early because like the worst thing in the world is to grind for 3 months, look at the scale's not changing, you
No.
look in the mirror, you still don't like the way you look, you still feel tired, everything still aches, you're like, why am I paying this dude so much money and spending so much time doing this? It's you want people to feel like they've succeeded from day one because they have, right? I mean, the best way to hit that goal on the horizon is to take one more step in the right direction, right? Just take
Right, right,
tomorrow's
right,
just
right,
one
right.
step, just like one
Yep.
step in the right direction. And then the next day, we aren't even going to talk about it yet. But tomorrow we'll talk about the next day. And we're going to talk about one more step in the right direction. And once you've accumulated enough of those, people start feeling some momentum. And then you get the buy-in and the excitement. And it's usually after whichever one, the husband or the wife, whichever one we started with, once they've had about a month to 6 weeks of success, they're like, I really, really, really want my wife or husband to do this. And you say, oh,
Okay, that's cool. Yeah.
I think that's a great
Nice.
idea. You should have that.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. How about environmental design? Like,
Yeah.
because with sleep hygiene, like you can wear the face mask, you can do blackout blinds,
Right.
all kinds of different things. How
Right.
does that play a role in the work you do with your clients?
Yeah. So again, I've known you for a while and I know you're steeped in this world too. And, give either one of us 24 hours and we could find a stack of literature on either side of any argument in the health and wellness space, right? Um, and and I don't pretend to know how to decipher that any better than anyone else. So what I default to evolutionary design, right? So and we don't know this for sure, but how do we think people slept 5,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago? This is what they did, right? They used the sun as their cue. There's a lot of money to be made in making things complex, but I say this is really simple, right? We don't see well at night. We're a very visual animal. Almost 80% of our brain is in some way involved in vision. Like it's a huge component of who we are as a species, and we can't see at night. It's a dangerous place to be. And so when the sun went down, we tucked away into someplace safe and we slept. And guess what? We slept the minimum amount that we possibly could so that we wouldn't get eaten or killed by a warring tribe or something, right? Um, and that turns out to be 8 hours, man. And it just is. And it doesn't matter if you like that number or not, or you want to sleep faster, or you really want it to be different, or if you put butter in your coffee or whatever. Like it doesn't matter. You need 8 hours of sleep no matter what you do. So what happened? The sun went down, blue light went out of their eyes. That blue light triggers the release of melatonin. Everybody knows that, right? You have to do that step. But Nobody falls asleep right when the sun goes down. It takes 2 to 3 hours. So melatonin does not make you go to sleep. Melatonin initiates cascades of events that eventually
Okay.
lead to feeling sleepy about 2 to 3 hours later. So what else happened? Well, you tucked away. You didn't do things, right? You didn't go climb cliffs. You didn't go hunt. You didn't go fight. You didn't go wrestle, whatever. You tucked away into a safe spot. And so you don't want to interact with your environment. All being asleep really means is that my neocortex is not interacting with my environment anymore. And because it's not interacting with the environment anymore, it's free to do all sorts of restorative, recuperative things at night, and to transfer things from short-term memory to long-term memory and emotionally categorize, but also rebalance all of my hormones and resupply all my nutrients. And lymphatics are going to pump out all my waste products, and all that stuff needs to happen. But my brain has to not be interacting with my environment. And the primary mechanism for that is the release of the neuropeptide GABA. GABA does, you think of every neuron in your brain as being a capacitor, right? And it's attached to 1,000 other capacitors. And you put enough energy into that capacitor, and that capacitor fires, and it connects to however many other neurons. And then those neurons fire. And that's how a thought happens, or a movement happens, or sensory happens, right? And what GABA does is it lowers the resting potential and makes it to where you have to put a lot more energy in there to fire that neuron, right? So to get that capacitor to fire, you have to put in 3 times as much energy now.
Mm.
And that's what it means that your neocortex is no longer interacting with your environment. Everything still works. Your eyes, ears, nose, mouth, skin, sensory, heat, cold touch, all that still works. You just aren't paying attention to it. You can get past that threshold by shaking somebody or turning on a really bright light or making a loud noise. So you can get past it. So you have to guard for blue light, realize that it's going to take multiple hours to feel sleepy after melatonin initiates, right? And then GABA is going to slow down your neocortex. You can overcome that anytime you want to. You can get up and start dancing. You can go to the gym. You can do whatever you want to do. Like everybody's been really tired after work and said, I'm going to come home and go to sleep as soon as I get off of work. And your buddy talks you into going to happy hour. You have a couple of beers and all of a sudden you're wide awake and you're coming home at midnight going, man, I did it again, right? You can overcome that GABA response pretty easily. So don't do that. And then, of course, the other thing that happened, um, when the sun went down and our ancestors didn't have the houses we have, the world got colder and they got colder, right? So those all sleep hygiene is one of those 3 things. And so I say simplify it to those 3 things and then make that work for your environment. Obviously, the least amount of stimulation you can possibly have in your environment while you're trying to sleep is the best sleeping environment that you can possibly have, because the stimulation can interfere with, can overcome that GABA response to your neocortex and cause you to wake up or nearly wake up or come out of a sleep stage or something like that.
That's awesome. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Kirk. Actually, I'm listening to you going, oh man, there's a couple things I need to change. So I appreciate that. You mentioned your product. You mentioned working with clients, or in your case, patients, for like a year-long program. You give talks around the globe. You consult with corporations. Where can people find about all the things you do, including your products and your services?
Yeah. So DOC, in the military, everybody with medical training is just a doc, like DOC, just a doc. Doc.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if you have like 8 weeks of corpsman school or 8 years of medical school and residency, you're a doc. And so, the moniker I earned in the SEAL teams was Doc Parsley, and that's my URL. It's DOC and then Parsley, like the herb, Parsley, docparsley.com. I have blogs on there. I have a YouTube channel. I have social, all of that. You can find all of that from there. I'm either Kirk Parsley or Doc Parsley on all those platforms. And if I were smarter, I would have set all those up to be consistent, but they're not. So they're kind of all over the place. And I don't remember which is which, but the URL is the easiest place. Sleep Remedy is the name of the product, and that's for sale on that website as well.
Sure, I'll include all your different platforms in the show notes.
Okay,
Kirk,
great.
great to see you.
Yeah.
It's as we're talking offline, it's been a while. You and I actually gave a talk together in 2011, 12, somewhere about there, a long, long time ago.
Is that Seal
So
Fit?
yeah, still fit.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah.
Oh, do you know how
So
Mark's doing, by the way?
He's
Uh,
definitely recovering from his
yeah.
the accident. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Thank God. Thank God. Yeah.
Yeah, he contacted me right after that happened, and I helped him get a surgeon and all that,
Oh, good, good.
and I've
That's
pinged
good.
him a few times, and he hasn't gotten back to me, so I was just hoping things were going well, and he was too busy to get back to me. Yeah, so
Yeah.
good
Now,
to hear.
yeah, he's definitely recovering, and he's doctor commander
Yeah,
because he got his
yeah,
PhD.
like this. Yeah,
Hey, well, Kirk, great to see you. I enjoyed this conversation. Please tell Brandy I said hello.
will do. Great to see you
And,
too.
yeah, man. Hopefully, we run into each other in the near future.
Yeah, hopefully.
All right, buddy.
All right.